let's welcome our speakers. Brett, would you like to go first and share your story?
Why do I have to go first?
Okay, Samantha.
Hi, my name is Sam. I am a freelance design systems lead and design token architect. I spend a lot of time currently hanging out with the token studio crew and community, unblocking people who get stuck with complex token architecture, how to do their naming, how to do their theming. I'm excited to be hanging out with you guys today to talk a little bit about the fundamentals of tokens, really, and get some differences of opinions, which I think is going to be so much fun. Thanks for organizing this and getting everybody together.
Love it. And thank you for sharing your links. Check your website. Looks really, really professional. So thank you. Great. Brett, what about going second?
All right, that's fine. I was just joking, by the way, but Sam, thanks for being the sacrificial starter. I'm Brad Frost. I'm a web designer and developer and speaker, consultant, writer, musician in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I've been working in design systems for a long time, created a thing called Atomic Design. And our latest adventure is creating a really deep dive course into the world of design tokens. It's called Subatomic, the complete guide to design tokens. So looking forward to talking shop with everybody.
Love it. Love it. Donnie.
Hi, my name's Donnie. I'm a design system architect based out of New York. I've been working in design systems for a while now. I realized that I'm kind of turning into the tokens guy. I didn't mean that to happen, but I think it's probably a matter of the strong opinions that I have when it comes to this stuff. I am writing a book called Mise en Mode, which is an approach to using tokens as well as some other features to provide some expression to our UIs. I did launch Design Tokens at FYI, which is kind of like a glossary for some terms that we use in our industry. And then finally below that is a playlist of my new show called Wireframe. It's actually sort of new, but sort of not new. But that's something to subscribe to on YouTube, where I have a live show at 5 p.m. on weekdays to talk about design, engineering, disambiguating a whole bunch of different things. I will most likely have a show later on today if you folks are interested. So subscribe there for hot takes live with me.
What time today?
5 p.m. Eastern Standard. Or Eastern, what is it? Whatever the hell ET is right now. I don't know. Is it delayed? I'm not sure.
Love it. Love it. Okay. Kelly, will you like to go next?
All right. Hi, I'm Kaylee. I do design systems at Intuit. On the side, I'm also the founder and co-chair of the Design Tokens W3C community group. And yeah, happy to be here nerding out about tokens with my fellow geeks.
So, Kayla, does that mean every time I say the spec, I'm supposed to see and picture it from your voice? Is that what's going to happen?
You also have to pay $5 every time you say the spec.
To buy me a coffee in some sort of crypto called a token.
Thank you very much for joining. My name is Farid. I'm going to host this session today. I'm a community advocate at Friends of Figma and Infa. Happy to be here. So the goal for this session is to understand design tokens, their role, evolution, tools, and what's next. So we will be going through multiple sections, and I will be adding more sections here below. We have so many materials in our speakers only board. So we will go through that together today. If you like this kind of stuff and would like to join the community, feel free to join our upcoming Inspect and Reflect, where we are going to take a look into Uber-based design system and see how it's being used within the Uber website, within the Uber products. And let's get started. So first things first, we would like to hear from you. We have 3 questions here. The way you can vote on that is just by clicking on this alignment scale. The first question is, our token strategy is flexible enough to support multiple brands, themes, and platforms? The design systems industry needs a universal standard for design token structure and naming. That will be interesting to know. And the tokens should evolve beyond theming and styling to express interaction and behavior rules. So I know that people are starting with colors, with spacings, and maybe we will explore to see if there is a room for expansion. Great. And while we're waiting for responses, who would like to share their definition of design? Kelly, would you like to go first?
Sorry, what was the question?
What is your definition of design tokens?
Yeah, it depends who I'm talking to. So if I'm talking to an engineer, I'm just going to tell them, hey, it's basically variables. If I'm talking to a designer, I'm going to tell them it's a way to scale your design decisions and put names on values. So we all speak the same language between design and engineering. Depending on the kind of leader I might be talking to, I might bring up things like velocity and consistency and those things that they might be caring about a little bit more than just how we select colors in Figma.
Love it. Brett, do you have other thoughts on that to add?
Yeah, I think that kind of contextualizing it for the audience is important. And that's kind of, it speaks to its nature, right? It is this shared language that glues different disciplines, tools, and systems together. And so that's its magic. But yeah, the way I like to describe it is as these implementation agnostic variables that describe a design language, right? And that gets realized in design tooling, in code, in other things. They, as Kaelig said, embody these design decisions and then basically deliver those to other places.
Love it. Samantha, what do you think about this third question? So we aligned on the definition. So let's speak about what are the core elements of the design tokens. We see within these responses that people would like to have more things covered within the design tokens. What is your take on that? Do you feel like we are moving from like more standardized to more advanced and mature design tokens as an industry, and there are more possibilities at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I don't think we've covered so far that I think are pretty important about design tokens is that they're written in this common language that makes them platform agnostic and shareable across different disciplines, tools, and technologies. And being able to share them and move them so that you can meet your team where they're at is something that kind of requires a bit of standardization on some parts of it. The fundamental sort of building blocks of what a token is and what has to be included in it and how those are written in code, those kind of have to be standardized. But if we were to say that the naming of tokens has to be standardized, well, then we also have to say that the naming of components and component architecture has to be standardized, because ideally you're writing tokens that are kind of in line with code, because the whole point of a token is not really for designers to capture a decision, but so that we can give that decision to somebody else so that they can use it in the tools and the tech that they want to do. And so in my opinion, like your team should align and everyone should know kind of, what is the template you're going to follow and how does that scale? And do, your executives who need a color for their PowerPoint presentation at 3 a.m. because they got the meeting they didn't think they were going to get, like, can they find the right color? I think it's important to have different names for different tokens at different parts of your structure so that the people who are sharing the decisions know what they're looking for and how to get them and can use them. Because like component specific tokens that are matching component architecture, I'm telling you, your boss does not give two whatevers about it. He just wants to know, like, what's the right color for this text so that I don't look like a fool.
Love it. And I really like your message around design tokens are platform agnostic rather than components are more specific in some cases. But yeah, love this. I was surprised to see Kaelig's vote here that he almost strongly disagreed that there should be an universal standards for design token structure and naming. Kaelig, would you like to jump into that?
Sorry, the chair of the community group thinks. Okay.
This is official, the spec sort of offline conversation.
So for those who know how CSS works, CSS has a specification, tells you how to write what's in between the brackets of the syntax, but doesn't tell you how to write what's outside. So you can name your styles kind of whatever you want. And so in terms of naming, the way we've been thinking about the specification, there's so many ways of expressing people's design decisions that it's good to have a structural grammar to how things might be shared across platforms and tools. But that said, we're not going to pretend that we're going to tell exactly how people should name their tokens. And so when it comes to naming, I think de facto standardization is going to happen, but the specification that we're working on is letting you those decisions.
Donnie, Brad, if you would like to jump in, wait for me to call your name. If you have something to share, please jump in.
Jump in. So Brad and I have actually spoken about this because I align with Brad's idea of the global component library. And I think there's an analog to that with tokens as well, because if there is a canonical button, which technically, I mean, in HTML there is, right? I mean, as much as people like to put role equals button on divs sometimes, there is a canonical button that we're supposed to be using. So that button that should be on every page in the same way should be described the same way on all those pages. And therefore, I believe that there is a way for us to standardize the way that we think about us expressing ourselves through the button. So as I think a lot of people might know, is I have a very strong opinion about the way that tokens should be structured in order to get expressive scopes and context. And that's why I align to having something that would be more strongly in the structure. The fact is that there are lots of opinions in design. And I think we need to recognize, unfortunately, a little bit in that is with those opinions comes less system, right? Trying to make a system out of opinions sounds like a fool's errand, unfortunately. So to have the ability to allow for the opinions to occur, I think is a good thing, because then you do have the ability to narrow what is going to be good. I mean, that's what happened in the web, right? We didn't know what a good user experience in the web was until we made mistakes in it a whole bunch, and then we're able to make the right decisions. So I think having it open is good for maybe right now, but I think gravitating towards something that's going to make it more standardized and shareable across platforms is going to be a big deal.
We need to have a new role in design system teams called the tokens police. So that,
Libraries.
I prefer janitor.
Brad, do you have any thoughts on the standardization topic?
Fine.
I think that Kalig's nuance is important, where it's like whenever we talk about any sort of standardization, and Donnie, what you were just saying, it's good to have things. I view pretty much everything through the lens of what is a respectful and valuable use of human beings' time on Earth. And what I've learned through working with many teams over many years is that a lot of people find themselves in this unfortunate situation where they have to figure this out for themselves to arrive at a similar yet slightly different implementation outcome, right? And I don't think that is a respectful use of human beings' time and energy and talents. So, all to say, I think that it's a great idea to provide structure and standards and smart defaults and things that are just like there for you to utilize so that you're able to do more fun, more valuable things with your time than figuring out what the hell to call a freaking token or a button. Is it primary? Is it secondary or whatever? Now, the other important caveat here is that it's really important to understand that standards and systems and all of these things exist. But the kind of beauty about this thing called the web is that all of the raw ingredients are still available to people. So if you need some crazy, starburst badge button and a global design system doesn't provide a starburst button, well, guess what? You could still go ahead and build it. Or if you have something that lives outside of a normal token architecture in order to support some like weird random campaign or one-off thing, that's totally fine. You could still do it the old-fashioned way. But how can we create the tools, the standards, the things that free other people up to do more valuable things with their time on Earth?
Love it. Thank you very much for sharing. And we can move to the next topic. Can we agree on the token icon? I see that we can clearly see who is the winner. And I'm very excited about this too, actually. I feel like this person needs to have access to all design token tools, like lifetime access to everything.
There.
Love it. Great. Let's speak about who is doing it well. So let me pull up our secret board and put some examples from different design systems. I put here a couple examples from Spectrum, SAP, Google, Atlassian, Nordhealth, Uber, GitLab, Microsoft, Terra, IBM, Git, Wise, and Polaris from Shopify. Sam, what is your go-to example when it comes to design tokens?
I don't have one example. It's a series of questions, and then you can find the right example. Like for teams that are just starting on design tokens journey, if you go and you look at the material design tokens, you've got a couple of examples there. There's a bunch of really cryptic parts of that name that if you're not in on what those abbreviations mean, you're losing context. And then of course in Figma, we've got this like real estate problem where everything is front loaded. So I mean, now we can make things a little bit bigger. We get more space, but I'm thinking about my stakeholders, my marketing team, everyone I'm sharing these decisions with. Like, do they know what md.ref.typeface means? If not, then like that's not a good example for them. Now, if your team is building native apps for Android, then like let's just start learning it now, and you're all going to align and you're going to start there. So it's like picking the right tools for the right teams. I think Adobe is a good example for people who just want like really great documentation to go in and read. And I think in general, when people start on tokens journey, they want somebody to give them the answers, and they get really disappointed when we all have to say to them, like, there's no one way. You're like, we can teach you bits and pieces and you put together a solution that's going to work for you.
Love it.
From my perspective, I have a very strong opinion when it comes to the naming of this stuff. And I really do believe that I don't think anyone's doing it well because there are so many differences. I've worked for several years trying to figure out what I believe is the most optimum structure for this stuff based on a lot of the experience that I've had, a lot of the token systems that are out there. And in the system that I've built out, I advertise it that I can express practically any interface with less than 3 dozen tokens, which should sound really appetizing to a lot of people because I'm confident many people who are listening to this right now have hundreds of tokens that they need to curate and otherwise go through and try to figure out. So to have the ability to only have 3 dozen to effectively curate the entire interface is certainly a selling tactic, though I'm not really selling anything at this moment. But the thing for me, of course, is that I want folks to standardize like we kind of saw earlier. And with all that work that I've done trying to get it to align, I really do think it works, and I haven't really found any place that it doesn't. And I'm really looking forward to people who look into that approach, which is the mise en mode approach, that can find the holes, because I really want to know where those potential holes would be for this stuff. But again, for the question of like, is anyone doing it right? Not in my view, but the caveat, they're doing it right for them in the context of where they are right now, right? In the mindset that I have in terms of my architecture, it does take a different way of thinking about it. It's the same kind of thing I liken to like responsive design, where it took people to have to change their mindset to, instead of having a desktop and a mobile site, to actually be able to do responsive stuff. So it's the same kind of idea where you have to have a different mindset in order for it to work. And if you're not ready for that mindset, you can't wrap your head around it. You don't have the resources, you don't have the time, and all of that stuff can contribute to wanting to do things the way that you are more familiar with. And that's okay because it's right for that team.
Hey, from your perspective, what is the main challenge within the industry? Like, why do we don't have a good example of the design tokens implementation within the design systems? Is it because of the variety of tokens? Is it because of naming conventions that sometimes it's hard to understand when to use what? Or is it related to automations and integration? What is the main capability that is missing right now at the moment in the design tokens?
I think what's happening is that surface level designers are looking at interfaces and going, I want this particular background to be purple. So what they do is they name that thing very specifically such that they can get the purple to go in there. And that's where the token bloat comes from, is because they're identifying very specific places in their UIs, in their experiences, that they believe a change needs to occur. And that's where you need to figure out a name for that. And naming things is hard. It's the big thing about our industry is naming things is difficult, and tokens is very largely about naming things. So that is what explodes everything. We need to have this, we need to have that, we need to have this. The way that I've thought about it is different from that, because instead of saying that this specific thing is different from everything else, I've tried to align it to something similar. And just like we do with components, typically, We want to use the same button here, the same button. We want to use the same sort of intention here and here and here. And that's why when I talk about tokens, I usually talk about intents as like the way that I say about semantic tokens, because again, I have a very strict definition of that. So I want to align everything in a system as opposed to, again, having all these snowflakes that like, okay, this token is different, this token is different, this token is different for these individual things. And with that research, I've been able to funnel it down to a very small set of tokens that's still, again, able to convey what most people are looking to convey.
So the most important challenge at the moment within the design tokens industry is that people are creating too many tokens. We have tokens bloat, and it's hard then for other consumers of your design systems to understand which kind of tokens to use in specific contexts.
I was on Ben Callahan's question a couple of months ago about design tokens, and in that conversation with the folks that were there, when we asked about what the hardest problem with tokens is, or the thing that I guess the strongest feelings toward it was tokens bloat. The amount of tokens due to the maintenance, due to the curation, during the naming, deployment, all of that stuff ends up being most difficult part of the whole thing. And again, that's why the focus on having so little tokens in the architecture that I try to promote is paramount.
Love it.
Yeah, I'd like to add that don't get too wowed by those beautiful artifacts that those incredibly talented teams are putting out. What I'm interested in is when I meet those folks is what does your token education look like? How far left do you shift in your token thinking? Like, when you onboard people, both designers and developers, do you give them a set of workshops and educational content that they have to go through to understand what tokens are, why it's important, the kind of tools they can use in their day-to-day so that it's weaved into their workflows? So for example, a developer that has to go to a documentation site every time they're trying to figure out what token to use is not as efficient as, for example, at Shopify, they have a VS Code extension.
Mm-hmm.
And most people are using VS Code at Shopify. So that VS Code extension provides autocomplete for tokens. All of a sudden, you get massive efficiency gains, and people wouldn't think of not using tokens at this point because it's in their workflow. It's just there. There's other things like the delivery pipeline. Your token, I think it was one of the talks at Into Design Systems, might have been the very first talk, actually. Your token strategy is only as good as your delivery pipeline. What that means is that if you create a token or update a token or deprecate a token in your single source of truth, how does it make its way all the way to the end user? And what are the steps there? So there's Figma files. How do people update libraries? There's the documentation site. How quickly can it get updated and how automated might that be? And then all of your code bases, like if you have multiple iOS code bases, Android code bases, various web code bases, how does it go there? And does it even go there? Because a lot of teams may have built amazing design documentation, but may not have the automation to make it all the way to production. So that's, once again, these are awesome examples, very well documented, but there's a lot of stuff that happens that we don't necessarily hear about.
Love it.
Yeah.
Brett.
Yeah, if I could jump in just to sort of build on what Kaylee is saying, I think that it's a interesting phenomenon that tends to happen is that us systems geeks tend to go inward and sweat about all of the things and have these arguments, as I'm sure Donnie is in there throwing punches, and you got to duke it out when we're talking about that. But I like to talk about the difference between the makers and the users of these systems, and I kind of pasted in a slide from our course here where it's like, when we're talking about the makers, and when we look at all of this documentation here, all of these examples, these are kind of like the manuals for people manufacturing a car, right? Which is a fundamentally different process and requires a certain kind of skill set and dynamic than someone who is putting the key in the ignition, putting the car into drive and hitting the accelerator, going to the grocery store, right? And so kind of back to what Caleb was saying is like a lot of this stuff is internal, and the gist is to make that stuff invisible, right? For the users, right? We're sweating all of the hard naming conventions and all of that stuff, but we shouldn't have to burden people who are just want to drive to the grocery store with a, like Kayla is saying, like a tutorial or onboarding for like, here's how an internal combustion engine works or whatever. So much of this stuff tends to bleed into each other. Most people are just trying to get to the grocery store.
Love it. I really like this example of makers and users. This is perfect. It is explaining that sometimes maybe as a makers, showing all these complexities behind the scenes might just scare end users. Samantha, do you have any thoughts on that?
I have a follow-up question for Brad. Do you think that now with AI and all of the access that we have, that these very comprehensive docs that we might have, that now you can actually put them somewhere and query them, and all of a sudden it becomes more valuable? Because I think working in design systems for a long time, it was like, what is the point of documenting this? You did it as like an insurance policy to be like, well, did you read the doc? And then you could point to where you had to go learn it yourself. But now, these comprehensive documents actually are a lot more valuable because you could maybe train a model with that. So I'm curious, like even with MCP, I don't even know the acronym.
Yeah.
Does your opinion change now that all this stuff is coming up so fast?
Yeah. For the last couple of years, we've been working with clients on exactly that. We're basically kind of taking the assets of the design system, the design token system, as well as the documentation, and wrapping that up and putting that into the technology changes by the day, as you're alluding to, Sam, but like, here are these systems, here are these processes, here's this infrastructure that we have in place, and we're able to use documentation, which historically there's a paradox for documentation. Nobody likes writing it and nobody likes reading it, but it's also really, really important. But I think that, Sam, what you're hitting at is, this is important for a number of reasons now, including these reasons that didn't exist when this documentation was written in the first place. So basically, like transforming the documentation into, here's a big dusty instruction manual that us human beings have to read, converting that into metadata that's wrapped around component library, the token system, in order for the machines to parse which components do what things and what these things are good at, what they're bad at, et cetera, in order for them to make the right decision. That's what we've been kind of tinkering with in our client work, with pretty good results. But again, like, the stuff is changing on the daily. So no doubt in my mind that will become more important. We're getting to a point where I think more people are going to be driving to the grocery store, but we need to make sure that the engines are not falling apart. So these systems are really critical, and they unlock a lot of really important quality and rigor and structure that's desperately needed in this age where we could just be like, make me a website, and AI will dutifully make a website.
Yeah.
So this is like a really kind of design systems plus this new crop of generative tools is a really beautiful combination, because the constraints that these systems provide allow us to go, like, is this good? That's the big question. Whether it's humans making things, whether it's AI making things, whether it's a combination of the two, or really anything, is it good? And with design systems, with design tokens and stuff like that, where you have a lot of these design decisions, technology decisions, accessibility best practices, branding best practices, UX, et cetera, all kind of baked into these things, we're able to better answer that question of, like, is it good, with like, yes, or probably better than it just kind of crapping out some weird abomination, and sort of random stuff. So yeah, this is fun. It's kind of a weird moment in time where these systems are being applied in very different ways.
Well, I mean, even how Kayla was saying, Shopify has this ability in VS Code plugin to query what a design token might be autocomplete. And it would be really cool in the design systems and design tokens world if you didn't have to read all of the documentation, but like if your check engine light is on the way to the grocery store, you could type it into your AI and be like, what does this light mean and why is it on? And it would be like, well, you just had your spark plugs redone. So maybe you need to go back to the mechanic because one might be faulty,
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
like that's kind of a cool thing about, like, I know one of the questions in this call is supposed to be kind of like, where is the future going and how is AI going to help or hinder? And I think like that's one of the things that I'm really excited about is having the ease of setting up something like an automated autocomplete for a token name, or being able to query the documentation to have it answer questions for me instead of me needing to read the whole thing.
Plus one on that, Sam. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the thing that I recognize is the Atlassian design system has a token picker that is, it's not driven by AI, but as far as I know, it's like a wizard, basically. You're using what you're trying to convey or express, and it'll give you a token at the end of that system. I actually want to challenge a little bit of what Brad said, because he said that documentation is important. And actually, as my hot take, I think in the year 2025, it's much less important. The docs for making a Tailwind plugin were awful. What I'm assuming that must have been doing is looking at source code to figure out the kinds of things that I needed. So imagine a world where we're not writing documentation for the GPTs or anything like that, but it's actually looking at the source, understanding the context, and giving us the answers that we're looking for. So in the triangle of design systems, we're talking about design, development, and some other point, I don't use documentation, but I rather use education, right? And that opens us up to a whole world of possibilities for the ability to educate our peers in how to use our systems, how to find a token, how to do this, without us specifically saying, I must write documentation in order for this stuff. Because otherwise, I think like someone else was saying about, the feelings that you get about realizing I don't understand this documentation, or I don't get what it's trying to tell me, or it's not even there, right? It feels awful. You feel like an idiot when you're like, oh, I'm reading Tailwind documentation. Why can't I make a plugin? There's so many other plugins out there. It's the same kind of thing when we think that the documentation is helpful and it's not. And we really need a different method of education for our resources.
Well, it's also like reimagining what documentation is. And this is like kind of like another important thing. So hard to agree, Donnie, that it's like, go over here for this thing. Again, it's the thing in our glove compartment, the owner's manual of our car. It's like, how many of us are busting that out, right? You're only doing that when things are going wrong. Really basic examples. You got a storybook, you got a Figma library assets panel. You hover over the thing, you're about to drag it onto your artboard or whatever. And it's like, where's the freaking tooltip that says, this is this component, it's good for these things and not these other things. Just, it's kind of like integrating the documentation. And Donnie, I like how you said it, it's the education, like the documentation is a means of education, but how could we make people do the right things, like Kaylee was saying, with things like autocomplete or whatever, but how do you kind of weave in and integrate? How do you make it easy for people to do the right thing?
100%.
I can share an example of how we're applying AI right now and
Nice.
how documentation is coming in handy. Once upon a time, there was a very large fintech accounting company, and they were innovating a lot. And they didn't have variables or a design token architecture. So developers would copy and paste values into their code. Fast forward 10 years later, a couple thousand repositories contain hard-coded values. This company wants to not only be the best at small businesses and accountants and providing them with the best services, this company also wants to go to larger companies and provide them with even more advanced services. So they decide to theme their existing product, and what you think might happen happens, where changing a token for creating a new theme is just basically impossible. There are parts of the product that look themed and some others that definitely don't get the theme because everything was hard-coded. So how do you go about changing values across hundreds and thousands of repositories in a timely manner? And so one of the ways to do that is to send a swarm of AI agents who understand the system. And because, okay, so first of all, you could do a search and replace, but then semantically, search and replace typically doesn't know the context of how like a value is being used. Whereas an agent can look at the code and infer based on the class name in the CSS or the component name where it's used, that this might be a card or a container or a button or an action or a form field. And based on all these heuristics, look through the entire database of tokens, and we're talking like hundreds and hundreds of tokens, know which one to apply with a certain level of confidence, 80+%. And then you end up with hundreds and hundreds of pull requests automatically open across hundreds of repos. The challenge this company is facing is that the token system needs to be excellently documented for this to happen well. Otherwise, the confidence level in those changes is super low, and then you can't even trust army of robots you've unleashed on your code base. So, I don't know if documenting everything is the best case scenario is that you don't need documentation because things are self-evident and education is doing the job. But in some cases, AI agents need a lot of context to be able to replicate things at scale. So that's our take on this right now.
Yeah, and that's been our experience as well. It took a hell of a lot of work to wrap these systems in the appropriate amount of context and to sort of set up the we ended up basically creating multi-pass kind of things, doing discrete passes. You really have to sort of break it into smaller and more discrete chunks, and those things do discrete things. And we found that playing around with how many passes of these things and what's being outputted and analyzing this stuff and adding the appropriate constraints really moved the needle and going like, is this marginally valuable? In our course, we break down a lot of the ways AI can be used in both the creation, application of design tokens. And there's a lot of opportunity, but Kaelig, I think that you're exactly right in saying is that you can't just go, this is a whole project. It becomes like a real honest to goodness project. And the hope is that in embarking on that project, you get, you're able to kind of convert things over faster than if you were to do it fully manually.
Love it. Let's dive into the next topic, tools. Maybe there are some interesting solutions on the market. I see that you added a couple comments. Let me know if I need to move them here as well. So I just copied and pasted the links that you shared here. Great. This is all partnered with Infa. They recently introduced new features for the design tokens. And maybe that's the way how people can start educating and understanding what kind of tokens are being used on the page, right? So this is a Chrome extension that lets you open and see all your tokens in the browser. The same applies for the components. So you can actually create collections and create different queries that will start searching and will tell you how many things you have in the spectrum of colors. And then you can actually define that token inside it. And when your designers are trying to understand what kind of token is being used, they can actually activate it and see it. This kind of feature, the design tokens, is available at the moment, but this recommendation system, which kind of tokens to replace, which kind of raw values to replace with the design token, will be introduced later. And for design system managers, having this measuring feature where you can actually see what kind of components are contributing to the adoption of your design system. And within the product itself, not the Figma, not the code, but the product itself in the browser will help people to measure, inspect, and measure the adoption of your design system when it comes to components and tokens.
I love that we're getting designers comfortable using browser tools. There's like, people get the GitHub face, like, oh, I'm not going in code. But there's browser tools you can use too to do this job. So it's really, this one actually it's pretty, it's looking nice. I feel like designers might actually feel like they could give it a go. I'm excited to give it a try.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that GitHub face.
Feel free to borrow that. I coined it a couple of years ago at a conference because it's true. Every time I talk to a designer and I'm like, no, we're just going to put your tokens in GitHub. They're like, I don't go there. I don't do that. I don't do the GitHub. I'm not a developer. I'm a designer. I don't do the GitHub. It's called the GitHub face, and we all have it, and it's okay. You'll get over it with the right helping hands.
Love it.
So what are your go-to tools or maybe open source library? So I've added here Style Dictionary. I also searched online for other tools. There are some new things that I never saw before, like Figma. and Terrazzo, where they are trying to cover this life cycle of token deployment, connecting Figma and your tokens.
I have another point on this as well, is that a lot of the reason why these tools exist is because you have too many tokens. Many of these things are trying to do token management for you, right? Because you have so many, you're trying to connect these nodes and do all these different scales and things like that. You have so many tokens there that you need something to manage them. And that's where a lot of these products come from. So that's why in what I work with, typically, I don't require any particular tooling because I only am dealing with less than 3 dozen tokens. So something to consider in this whole thing is that if you reduce your token bloat, then you reduce the dependency on a particular tool to start managing your stuff.
The one thing, this is good. I dig hard on tools can help, but basically, like, we can't help ourselves but to be like, what's the tool? What's the Figma plugin? What's the tool? Give me the answer, this versus this tool versus this. And it's just this fixation that when we work with teams, all of the real issues and the things that these teams are looking for tools to solve are ultimately human problems. And it becomes this like total Band-Aid for how to solve these. You just put this Band-Aid over top of this human problem where designers and developers aren't collaborating and, everything else is a freaking mess. And they're like, oh yeah, this tool just does it. Just use this. It's crazy. And it's not to say that tools don't have utility. Of course they do, and they can help. But I think that it's important to stress and underscore the importance of human beings actually working with one another. A lot of these tools, ironically, they say that they are facilitators of collaboration, but they, in fact, keep human beings away from other human beings. Tools can help, but they are not a panacea. They are not the answer. My overwhelming piece of advice after doing this for so many years is to really focus on fostering good and healthy relationships with other people. That is going to make everything go a lot smoother, even as the tooling landscape continues to just change by the daily.
You heard it here first. Know the problem. Whatever.
We're rolling out AI as a coworker, as a sidekick, as a coach. And I was asking the team the other day, what would it look like for that coach in your IDE, in your sidebar, telling you, hey, these are the tools that can make it easier. And these are some suggestions, but hey, it looks like you're doing some micro interaction stuff. Go talk to your designer. Let's sit down together, get on a Zoom call and work together to get to the best experience. Yeah, because I always tell people it's great to have awesome tools that help you build at the speed of thought, but don't use those as an excuse not to speak to each other, because they can facilitate the handoff to a point that you have the impression that the handoff is just enough. That you just throw that file over the wall. But in the end, I think the best experience is just 2 or more people pairing with each other and co-building.
Love it. I know that we're out of time. It was a pleasure chatting with you. Feel free to join the community if you like this kind of stuff. The feedback board will be available. The recording will be shared. The only problem, I forgot to click on record button. The quality will be bad because it will be just the quality out of YouTube stream. Thank you very much for joining. Thank you, Donnie, Samantha, Callie, and Brad for joining me and sharing your insights.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.